Abhaya Chandana Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, ISKCON founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Radha Krishna. Gopika Sayan Kun Radhakunda Giri Govardhan ki jai, Vrindavan ki jai, Maduram ki jai, Vasami ki jai, Yamunamai ki jai, Shrimati Devi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premananda. All glories the assembled devotees, all glories the assembled. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go. So we'll read the translation to this poem. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where is such a personality as Srinivasa Acharya gone? Where am I Sarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees, and whose association he thus simply weeps. So, Magana Timiranda Shah Gamanjana Shlakara Chakshur Medikam Tasmai Maha. So today, as I mentioned before, we are commemorating the disappearance day of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is the spiritual master of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is the founder of Acharya of this. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was known as the Nrsimha Guru, which we're going to be speaking about in a few minutes. And his particular advent is very important as far as Gaudiya Vaishnavism is concerned, because what happened after Lord Chaitanya's initial followers and their followers left thinking about those disasters right now. So here's a picture of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He was a Naishtiki Brahmachari. He always remained fixed in Krishna consciousness. He is a Nityasiddha devotee. He is a Shakta.
Avatar, which is empowered by Krishna.
Yes, a specifically empowered Jiva soul himself, but he is empowered by Krishna to carry out a mission, a very special mission. So, Srila Bhakti, before I start talking about Apasampradayas, which is an interesting topic, Srila Bhakti, do you know him?
No, Goswami. News reporter.
Oh, he's a news reporter, that's good. That's good, I'm okay, so much for that. So, anyway, so Apasampradaya means deviations from the Sampradaya. Because what happens is that you have something originally pure, and after some time, the message becomes lost. Krishna mentions that in the Gita. He says originally he taught the Bhagavad Gita to who, Ayush? Vivas Manu, Ikshvaku. And it was passed down through the chain of disciplic succession. Eventually that message was lost, so Krishna had to come down and do what?
Reestablish.
No, teach the Bhagavad Gita again. To who?
Arjuna.
Okay, good. At least some of you know. All right, so he taught the Bhagavad Gita again to Arjuna. Use the philosophy of Krishna consciousness for their own purposes. And we're going to mention a few of them. One is called the Jati Gosai, it means caste Goswamis. These, he may not be a caste Goswami, I just used his picture. Sorry about that. So the caste Goswamis, families, and they took the name Goswami. He named Karuna Goswami, but she wasn't a sannyasi. So the word Goswami was originally reserved for people who were Goswami, able to control the goes. What's a go?
Senses.
And senses. People who are renounced from this material world. And then later on it became a family name, and people who said they had this particular family name became the inheritors of various property of temples around India. Not only in Vrindavan, but around India. And in many cases they sold the properties of the deities, considering the properties to be theirs. And the deities had very little properties, and the deities to this day in some places are not taken care of. The father of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the father of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, prayed for a right-hand man of Lord Chaitanya to come down and save us from all these upasampradayas. So he was the fourth son of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So here's one of the upasampradayas. Another one is caste, Brahman. And you'll find a lot of this discrimination even there in India. Although Lord Chaitanya says what? Kiva Vipra, Kiva Nyasi, Shuri Kevanaya, Ye Krishna, Tattva Veda. Say Guru, why? That if one knows the science of Krishna, he can be a Brahmin, Vipra, a learned person, a Shudra, Sannyasi, Grahasta, then that person can be accepted as Guru. That's the important point. And that question of whether one knows the science of Krishna. Krishna one time even spoke the science of Vedic literatures from Hayagriva and also Macha. Both things. So here, people are accepting Krishna consciousness from a horse's mouth or from a fish's mouth. So why not accept both from men and women? All right. There's a good argument for you. Okay. Anyway, so the Smartas, they were the caste members. Brahmins do samskaras. And they charge you for those samskaras, right? You know, if you want to be born, you got to go to Brahmin, otherwise you can't take birth. If you want to have a name, you got to have a Brahmin. If you want to die, you got to have a Brahmin. So, in other words, you got to pay to play. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he appeared to dissuade people from following this particular caste culture. Also, there's the Prakrita Sahajas who take things very easily, think they can understand everything about Radha and Krishna, and they project their material mentality, thinking, oh, Radharani's relationship with her husband. And sometimes you hear this in romantic exchanges. You're my Radha and you're my Krishna. Pretty poor excuse for Radha and Krishna. So that's called Krita Sahajas, people who dive into trying to understand Radha and Krishna. Conjugal loving affairs without becoming free. Vishayacharya Kavi. Shuddhahavi Mana. Free in their minds from all high standard. Then there's the Gauranga loving affairs. Then there's a particularly interesting one. The Saki Beka Chuddhadari Rasa Leela imitators. If that's a gopi, we're in trouble. If that's a gopi, Krishna will take sannyas in this world. And Attavadi, that means they think they're very great, like man gods. And then they had some combinations between the Sufis and the Tantrics, and it's called syncretists. I don't need to get into all these details. And Kartavaja, worshippers of the Guru as God, who is representative of God. Combinations, Nada Nadi, you got all there's many of them. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as I mentioned before, is praying, please, Lord Chaitanya, save us from all these different deviations that are masquerading in the name of Vaishnavism, because even people like Vivekananda, for example, religion. Can you imagine that? I mean, it was, that is, the Vaishnavas were not respected. They were considered to be just like a silly bunch of people, basically. Whereas we have the highest philosophy, but it was contaminated or mixed with people's material desires. So Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur said, we have to do something about this. And as a result, his fourth son was born, and that fourth son later Prasad. Bimal is actually the goddess that takes the prasadam from Lord Jagannath and distributes it to everybody. So in other words, he's considered to be like prasadam of Lord Jagannath. And so when he was very young, many different things happened. When he was first born, he was born with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, just like we have a Brahmin thread. And then when he was very young, it came time for his grain ceremony. It was like 5 to 6 months or 7 months. And it was the Rath Yatra ceremony, and the Rath Yatra cart stopped in front of his house in Jagannath Puri. He was born in Jagannath Puri. And it wouldn't move. Even though they tried to pull the cart. This is very similar to what happened until Lord Chaitanya put his head behind the cart and pushed it with his head. So the cart wouldn't move until they brought this little child out and put him under the lotus, under the feet on his head, all around his body. And then he took his first grains right on the cart, the Rath Yatra cart. In fact, even when he was really small, he refused to eat unless it was prasadam. Great determination. So the cart was stopped for 3 days in front of his house. And at 3 years old, these are signs of a Mahapurush, a great personality. Even his physical features, as they are described in the Vedic literatures, had all the signs of a Mahapurush, like the eyes were like lotus petals, the arms of a certain delineated in the Vedic literatures. So at 3 years old, he took a mango before it was offered to the deities. And his father mildly chastised him. He said, you don't eat food that's not offered to the deities. That's bhoga. That's life. And that's a big austerity for someone. You know, if you're an American, so what? Never take a mango, but mango is the greatest sense gratification fruit. It's the king of all fruits, according to Srila Prabhupada. So even when it was offered a mango later on by his followers, he said, I'm too sinful. I cannot. At 7 years of age, he was given a kurma deity. Kurma, of course, is the tortoise incarnation of the nectarian ocean of devotional service, Bhakti Ras. So his father was giving him the chance to dive into the ocean of Bhakti Ras. At 7 years, he had memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita. Amazing. And he was also giving lectures on it. 11 years old, he went out and preached with Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. He had a word in the dictionary. And so you see that some of the words he uses, if you read the Brahma Samhita that ISKCON has published, are so difficult to understand that you have to read the Brahma Samhita with a dictionary, accompanied by a dictionary. And even Prabhupada said that he couldn't understand some of the words there. It was known as he developed his own shorthand called Vikanto. At 11 years of age, I had a discussion, an argument with him, and this astrologer was so mortified after talking to him that he had, in other words, he had to run into the little boy's room. So, and also, his father gave him the Nrsimha mantra. The Nrsimha mantra was given to him not only for his protection, but Lord Nrsimhadev destroys the inauspicious things in our heart. Like we have these things called anarthas in our heart, in our hearts. And these anarthas mean want, illusion, envy, fear. And Lord Nrsimhadev comes and he tears them out of our hearts, just like he tore the intestines out of the stomach, or the intestinal part, of Hiranyakashipu. So it's very, very important. 16 years, he decided to be, and he made a whole society of brahmacharis, which is called the August Assembly. And the only one who actually kept that promise was Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Then he went to the university, which they call college, between 1892 and 95, And when he was getting ready to graduate, he left because he thought that if I graduate from this university, there's going to be pressure. So therefore, I don't want to get entangled. Nobody will marry me if I'm not a graduate. This was his plan. And there won't be any pressure. Astrology, even more, published a book called the Commentary on the Surya Siddhanta. The Surya Siddhanta is the original text of the Vedic literatures that deals with astrology. And he published something called the Navadvip Panjika, which is the Vaishnava calendar, which we use to this day. Because now we have it computerized so we can compute the different dates according to the location. Like sometimes you'll see that here in Goloka we have a different Janmashtami than in India. That's because of the calculation of the planets, the sun, and the moon is different at different times in India than it is here. So we are very precise in doing this by his mercy. So he began to work as an administrative assistant for the king of Tripura between 1895 and 1905 and really cleaned things up. You know, Thakur cleaned things up as far as honesty and cheating in Jagannath Puri. In fact, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur cleaned things up, so he was taking from the hundi of Lord Jagannath and spending it on himself. So when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur gives to Lord Jagannath something, 50-something offerings a day, and the king got so upset that he started a month-long sacrifice to kill Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. With a whole bunch of Brahmins, like 100 Brahmins, they were always going, swaha, swaha, dead. So you find a lot of dishonesty in the name of politics. Of course, America, we're quite familiar with that right now. And that's all over the world. It's a symptom of Kali Yuga. It's the final principle of religion that's going down the tubes, which is truthfulness. He stayed in Puri with his father, gave classes on one called Radhacharan Das Babaji, because Radhacharan Das Babaji, he was like a Saki Beki, and he had established this bogus mantra. I guess that's really wrong. And what that mantra says is, do the Hare Krishna mantra in Sankirtan, just do it softly. And so they won't chant Hare Krishna mantra loudly. And Prabhupada was very upset. This particular group established their temple next to our Krishna Balaram Mandir. I don't know if they're still there, but I remember when I first stayed in our Krishna Balaram, it was chanting. It was horrible. And so he preached against this guy. This guy was so popular. One thing that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said is that this particular individual was an incarnation of Shukracharya. Shukracharya is the priest of the demons. And he hates Vishnu. Why does he hate Vishnu? Lord Vamanadeva poked Shukracharya in the eye. So he's always trying to get even with Lord Vishnu. And so he started this bogus mantra. He thought, why should there be Sankirtan? Let's just don't chant it loudly. So, anyway, there was a riot in Jagannath Puri, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had to be. He met the spiritual master. Actually, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur recommended that he take initiation from Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj. Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj was known as more or less illiterate. He could read a little bit in Bengali, but he really wasn't considered literate as far as the Brahmanas were concerned. So, and Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj in educational status. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur attributed his father's instruction to help him in humility, develop humility, although he was already humble. So we approached Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj for initiation. He approached him for initiation, and Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj first said, I have to ask Lord Chaitanya. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came back another time and said, did you ask Lord Chaitanya? And Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj said, I forgot. Then he came back another time. Well, he said no. And then, after some pleading and basically threatening to, just kill himself, he got the mercy of Gorgashodas Babaji Maharaj. Gorgashodas Babaji Maharaj initiated him as Varshavanavi Devi Doyataya Das, which means the mercy of Srimati Radharani. Details about the previous Vaishnavas, the history of previous Vaishnavas around the time of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord Chaitanya's followers, and the followers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But he understood, in order to preach effectively, he would have to be a sannyasi. These saffron robes were utilized by members of the Sri Sampradaya, who were sannyasis, and also the followers of Vivekananda. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur thought that if he would have to be a sannyasi, so he studied the details of sannyasis in South India and also Vivekananda's Sampradaya or Vivekananda's teachings in order to understand how to present himself. This is similar to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who took sannyas because one of the reasons was that he was being disrespected by his students. For those who are sannyasis, natural respect. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur decided to do this, but he wanted to study the methodology. And before he took sannyas, he vowed to chant 1 billion names of Krishna. 192 was leaking, the roof was leaking, he just held an umbrella, didn't even fix up his hut. And sometimes very hot, sometimes very cold, and he would eat once a day like people eat during Chatamasha, but for a long period of time. Whoops. And then in 1906, he initiated his first disciple, and he was given by his spiritual master, and his father, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So what that means, a tiger destroys everything, especially the Bengal tigers. And so these deviant sects actually pollute one's spirituality, so much so that it's completely mundane. There's no connection anymore with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the other Goranga. I have one disciple in the UK who actually goes around with Goranga stickers and she gives it to everybody. And many years ago, she used to paste them on big billboards and signs in the middle of the night. Yes, she would go out with her. The people driving in Scotland through the roads would think it's a bridge company, the Goranga Bridge Company. She's a very nice lady. Actually, she visited here one time too. Her name is Manoharini Radha, and she lives in the UK. And she's always getting people to chant Gauranga. And so they're Veda. These are accepted by the ritualistic brahmanas. So it's very important to authenticate what we're teaching in the original 4 Vedas. In fact, in the original Vedas, in the Rig Veda, you have information, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Pada Pashanti Yad Surya, that all the demigods, they're worshipping Vishnu. Midnapur, in which there was a discussion as to who was superior, Brahmins or Vaishnavas. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur completely defeated those who were trying to propose that Brahmanas were superior, Brahmanas by birth, were superior to Vaishnavas. And he did it in a very interesting way over about 3 days. And when he was finished, the crowd went wild. The police, in order to protect Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, lifted him up and dunked his feet in a barrel of water. And they took that water and sprayed it on the crowd. Because that was protecting him. In 1911, he established the Vedic basis for accepting Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, very important literature. And people got really upset with him because he was ruining their business. So he was ruining the Brahmin business. So one time he went to a king's palace and there was a whole plan to put poison in his food. But he understood this, a Krishna informed him, and he only took a tulsi leaf because the king was a meat eater. He would never eat anything at someone's house if they ate meat. Another time, and anyway, he wasn't allowed to speak. Another time, there was actually a whole conspiracy. It's not an Indian police officer, westernized, Christian West. Anyway, so they went to the police officer, and the police offered 25,000 rupees. That's a lot of money in those days. Remember, you're talking about the early 1900s. I mean, 25, when I was per dollar. Now it's like, 60 or 70 rupees. 70 rupees per dollar. So, tremendous difference. So you can imagine in the early 1900s, Prabhupada said with a few anna, that's even less than a pice. You could purchase food for a week for a family, rice for a week. So 25,000 rupees, the police officer informed Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He said, normally, no problem looking the other way, if someone's killed. So there were many attempts like that. And he established the first printing press, which he termed the Brihat Mridanga. Like he said, a mridanga can be heard in a room, or maybe over a distance of 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. But in the printing press, with the printing press, it can be heard all over the world. And you see, wherever there has been a revolution, recently at least, in the world, it's always been based upon people studying the teachings. And in China, they had this little manifesto of Mao Zedong. I don't know if anyone remembers this. They had this red book everybody was holding up like that. So always through literary events to take a particular path. So he established his own printing press. In 1914, his father disappeared. In 1915, his spiritual master, Srila Goloka Babaji Maharaj, disappeared. And there was a fight over who would have the transcendental body, who would have the samadhi in his body. The other sannyasis who were Babajis at that time wanted the body of Goloka Babaji Maharaj so they could have a place of tourism where people would come and give money. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, okay, if any of you had not had illicit sex life for 1 year, you could take. Otherwise, you'll be cursed. And so they didn't want to do anything. Nobody came forward. And he said, well, anybody in the last month? Nobody came for 2 weeks. No one came forward 3 days. No one came forward. So he established the samadhi of his spiritual master. You can see how much cheating there is. I mean, this is not simply that's unique to India. Everywhere in the world. Like in the Bhagavatam, it says, in Kali Yuga, religion will simply be a change of dress. In other words, if someone's dressed a particular way, has a particular title, so we should see what are the qualities of a person. Not the title, not the dress. And all over the world, people are being cheated, not only in religion, and all sorts of different areas, business, politics, everything. So, as they say, what is it? Kavya empor. Let the buyer beware. That's Latin. Let the buyer beware. The Panchatattva appeared in his dream and assured him of success in his preaching. Sannyas before a picture of his spiritual master, because there was no one to give him that type of sannyas in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And he established a temple in Calcutta by living on a roof, and he went door to door to help establish that temple. In 1922, something very remarkable happened. He was giving a class on the roof of a temple in Calcutta, at the Dangal Nath, and he met by Charanaravinda. And he told Srila Prabhupada that you're educated young boys, because he was speaking to more than one person, so why don't you speak this, or teach this Chaitanya's message in English? And Srila Prabhupada first gave a mild argument. He said, who will hear Lord Chaitanya's message when India is still a captive country? Because Srila Prabhupada was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi at that particular time. His diploma from the university, even after graduating, he rejected the diploma because this was part of the Swaraj movement. And so, his spiritual master. And from that point onwards, even though it took him 11 more years before he took initiation, he considered Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to be his spiritual master. In 1990, which is where Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur lived in the Mayapur area. And he gave a lecture at that particular point about people who are using the Shalagram Shila to crack nuts with. As you see, there's a monkey here using a stone, not a Shalagram Shila, to crack nuts with. In other words, if we're supposed to serve Krishna. It's a very, very important point. Like, we understand Krishna's providing for us. We don't have to pray, my dear Lord, give us this day our daily bread, because Krishna is giving us. Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitanam Eko Bhavanam Yogadadati Kama. But we pray for the benefit of others, and we pray to be able to serve Krishna. And then he established the temple in Mayapur, which is the headquarters as the acharyas of the four main sampradayas, the Rudra Sampradaya, Lakshmi Sampradaya, Kumara Sampradaya, and of course, Brahma Sampradaya. Arvika Giridhari, there. Beautiful temple, and I'm not going to read this. I'll mention it. This is his first lecture at his first Vyas Puja. It was called Humbler Than a Blade of Grass. He is actually accepting this worship, this Vyasa Puja, as service to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, not out of false ego. And then in 1925, he instituted the circumambulation of Navadvip Dham, and people were so upset because in his group there were people who were from lower castes. There were Shudras, Chandalas, of course they weren't. And basically they were throwing stones at him. And even in Braj today, this is something that we're doing right now in Braj, we're cultivating some of the people who they're Brajavasis, but they're actually from the lower caste. So we're trying to get them chanting Hare Krishna and taking initiation within Gaudiya Vaishnavas and within Lord Chaitanya Srila Prabhupada movement. Some of these people are not even allowed in the temples, even though they're Brajavasis, because they were considered lower caste. So Lord Chaitanya never considered like that. He had people from all castes, all walks of life. Haridas Thakur was born in a Muslim family. And even Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, it was considered they had lost their caste because they had worked for the Nawab Hussain Shah. Yata Chilo Harinam Udarila. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur followed in Lord Chaitanya's path, and therefore people got very upset. They were throwing stones at the Parikrama party. And 1926, he sent sannyasis out all over India, preaching around India, established an English daily newspaper called The Harmonist, and established kirtas, that means the places where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited during his India tour, because I like to stay going on. But anyway, when I was going around India and leading tour groups around India, we would stop at these various places and actually see the footprints that had been installed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Chaitanya visit. Like if you go to Tirupati, for example, you'll see there's an installation of Lord Chaitanya's feet there. Or if you go to Hobalam or any of these other places, by the mercy of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he established diorama exhibits to portray the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya and the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, established a very big temple in Calcutta, in Bad Bazaar, in Calcutta. At one point, he got so upset with the devotees who were in this temple because they were fighting over who would have what room. And he said to Srila Prabhupada that if you ever get any, or Srila Prabhupada, if you ever get any money, you can sell the marble in the temple to get money to print and distribute books. He considered the most important thing, printing and distribute books, established examinations, and then he sent disciples to the West. That's not one of his disciples. It's Hanuman. Because he compared them to Hanuman. And they were, basically, they had very, very limited success. He brought them back, and he wasn't so happy with what they had accomplished. And actually it was Prabhupada later on who actually fulfilled the desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Srila Prabhupada understood, in fact, that was brought out in a poem that Prabhupada wrote for one of the Vyas Pujas of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and one of the lines is, absolute ascension thou hast proved. In personal calamity thou hast moved. Now, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saw those lines, he said, he has understood me. And he said, whatever he publishes, whatever he... And so, at that point, it was understood that he was completely in touch with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. In fact, Srila Prabhupada's Pranam mantra is very similar to that. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachati. The world, as a servant of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, to deal with and annihilate or challenge. And then in 1935, Prabhupada met his spiritual master. Prabhupada was a grahasta at this particular point. And that's where he heard that if you ever get any money, print and distribute books. And he also told Srila Prabhupada that there's going to be a fire. In other words, there'll be some fighting in the Gaudiya Math after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur leaves this world. And Prabhupada kept his brothers trying to get him to join. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, leave him alone. In due course of time, he'll do everything. It was quite prophetic. So 36 was his last year of preaching. And here's Prabhupada's, the letter that he wrote to 1936, right before, 2 weeks before he passed away. Prabhupada had written him a letter saying basically, I can't do too much for your mission. You have so many sannyasis and brahmacharis, full-time people, I'm a grahastas, sometimes I give donations. What can I do? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote back to him, I'm fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to the people who are not conversant with the languages of the other members. This will do much good to yourself as well as your very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teaching in the people in general as well as philosophers and religionists. Quite prophetic. I advise everyone to preach the teachings of Rupa Raghunath, those, of course, the followers of Lord Chaitanya, with all resources on the dust of the lotus feet of Sri Sri Rupa Goswami and Raghunath Goswamis. You should all work conjointly, means cooperatively, under the guidance of your spiritual master with a view to serve the absolute knowledge of personality of Godhead. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you should always chant the transcendental name of Godhead with patience, and there are many amongst you who are well qualified and able workers. We have no other desire whatsoever. So to summarize, he was called a Singha Guru. Actually, he sometimes approached impersonators and Mayavadis and challenged them, and even pick them up like this, or hold on to their shirt like that. A piece of cotton. Why are you wearing this shirt? And, they were scared of him. He was known as the great reformer in Gaudiya Vaishnava, preached against Vaishnava sects, met with acharyas and leaders of all different sects, and unified the four major sampradayas by stressing the points of agreement. And he actually published works of other acharyas, even Madhvacharya and Ramanujacharya, who was Sri Sampradaya. Established 64 temples in India, printing presses, published Chaitanya Bhagavat in English, Chaitanya Mangal, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the Brahma Samhita. And he edited Bhaktivinoda Thakur's works. He established essays and hundreds of articles published in magazines and books, and made an institution, which was actually something unique in Chaitanya, the six Goswamis of Vrindavan. There were no institutions. He cautioned about his institutions. He said at one point, there's never been in the past any institution that has not destroyed the spirit of the religion, the spirit of the philosophy. So Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, also took this up very seriously and established the GBC, Governing Body Commission, to unify his mission, but his followers didn't do. And our Srila Prabhupada did this, and that's what's holding ISKCON together today. And very important point. And he also used modern technology cars, radios, boats, sewn cloth, which were all prohibited for Chinese, which is also prohibited, but for the person. And he used non-spiritual people to help the movement. That means he engaged people, even if they weren't interested in Krishna consciousness, to helping the movement. Created displays, and he engaged Maya in Krishna's service. Talked about Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana, the three aspects of Krishna consciousness. Sambandha, the philosophical basic understanding. Abhideya, what to do, and emphasized kirtan, but it's an initiation into Nama, Ekon Dharma. There's so many statements, both in Chaitanya Charitamrita and even in the Vedic literatures, Kalaya Doshan He Rajan Ashjita Mahadgunan. Kirtanadeva Krishna Sha Bhukta Sangha Parambajet. In this age of Kali is an ocean of quarrel. In 37, he left this world, and successors get into it. Prabhupada said, this is our Prabhupada said, before writing these books, I never really wrote before. I wondered, how will I do it? So I just sit down and repeated what I learned from myself. It's because I've delivered the message as it is without any concoctions. So, that's it. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Pushpanjali first, and then after that, the arti of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. What?
Throwing of flowers, not rice.
Not rice. Pushpanjali.
I know, it's like popular.
Oh, Pushpa. Yeah, Pushpa, right. So, so worship of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whose picture we have here, right next to Srila Prabhupada's Pyasa San. And we're going to recite the Mangala Charana prayers responsively. We go through the pranam mantras of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And each time we go through those pranam mantras, we throw the flowers, saying Esha Pushpanjali 3 times. Then we do the pranam mantras again 3 times. Then we do the pranam mantras again 3 times. And then Arti, Guru Puja. Okay?
Wonderful presentation.